Hello, my name's Colin Crithers, and I'm a student reporter and broadcaster at the University of Iowa. As a journalist, my job is to tell stories, while also balancing everything else going on in my life as a student. But no one tells our stories. So, my goal is to tell the stories of the student journalists, broadcasters, and storytellers all across the country. Let's walk the student beat. Welcome in. Today we're walking the student beat with Matthew Mangam. Matthew, how's it going today?
Doing good. Thank you for having me, Colin. Looking forward to talking some student journalism.
Absolutely. I appreciate you joining me here. So if you don't mind just starting us off with the basics, introducing a little bit more about yourself and the journalistic outlets you work with.
Yeah, so I'm Matthew Mangum, currently a student at Rutgers University, heading into my senior year. I'm the head sports editor for the Daily Targum, that's Rutgers student newspaper. Also write for Hudson River Blue, that's a MLS website that kind of covers New York City FC and basically the New York soccer scene all around that. And I also do student broadcasting for WRSU, which is Rutgers Student Radio Station.
Absolutely. We're going to dive into all of those. But first, if you don't mind, just kind of giving us insight on why you fell in love with journalism or what led you down this path.
Yeah, so I don't have like a specific like moment that's it that got me in, but I always remember, in elementary school I loved writing, just writing in general, whether it was like stories or whatever. And then in high school I was looking at my electives, and I'm like, let's try journalism, let's try that. And news didn't really interest me or stuff like that, but I was like, come on, sports is pretty cool. So in high school I took sports journalism classes, learned how to write there, covered my local high school team for, the high school paper and became the sports editor of that. And in that moment, I was like, yeah, this is awesome. This is what I want to do. So I knew I went to Rutgers, I was like, I got to get involved right away.
Yeah, and talk about getting involved at Rutgers, getting your foot in the door there. How did that look?
Yeah, so I spent the first semester kind of just adjusting to Rutgers. I probably should have joined a little bit earlier, but like I knew once winter break hit after of my freshman year, I was like, all right, I got to get started. So I reached out to the Daily Targum editors at the time, basically just like give my background. That I'm interested in, writing for you guys. And then from there, I covered women's lacrosse as my first beat, which is pretty cool. Looking back at it, very, very different compared to my writing now, and like just know everything how I kind of covered games. Same thing for the student radio station. I just reached out and I called a lacrosse game that spring. My first one, I was very nervous for that, but So from then and that point on, I've just been really involved with the radio station and the paper. More with the paper, obviously, because writing's more my forte. Working my way up to head sports editor now, and yeah, it's just been a lot of fun.
And then for those that might not know or like haven't listened to previous episodes, if they listen to this podcast at this point, they probably know what the Daily Targum might be. But if they haven't yet, how would you explain what the Daily Targum is and what your role is there to someone?
Yeah, so like I said, it's the Rutgers student newspaper. Basically, everybody who writes for the Targum is a student, whether it's an editor or just a regular, correspondent. We all work in this like office in one of the student centers, and uh, you know, nights during the week, and we all just basically publish articles together. We have copy editors and everything. Editors for each desk, whether it's news, opinions, Inside B, which is kind of like, media, like, movies and everything, all that stuff. And we have an editor in chief, managing editor. So there's a big, office where we all work together. We all just kind of go through the editing process together for our own stories, and it's pretty cool. And my role basically, head sports editor, so I'm the one that plans out the schedule and everything. Our publication schedule, like Monday we're gonna run this story, or Tuesday we're gonna run this story. Kind of just, and I also have associate sports editor too, so it's not just me. I have someone else that also works with me, but we both edit articles a good amount. But my role is more just kind of like I'm planning out the whole desk and saying, oh, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that. Of course, he has some say too, but just stuff like that. I was the associate last year, so it was a really easy transition into head sports editor for me. Um, and yeah, it's basically just I kind of oversee the sports desk basically.
Absolutely. And you mentioned that your writing is different like now than it would have been on your first initial beat. How so?
That's a good question. To me it just seems worse. I don't know how to explain it, but like, it's just kind of like maybe it's like I write clearer now, and I feel like I found my voice. Basically, that's kind of what I want to say. Like, I feel like I have a certain writing style that I follow now, and also it's inspiration from reading other people's works, of course, and talk from people that have read my work, other editors I've had in my life, giving me more advice. So I just feel like I'm able now to write maybe clearer
Mhm.
and kind of, like I said, my voice, like the way I want to write.
Yeah, I mean, that's something I find to be very difficult in writing. I'm not the greatest writer in general, anyways, but how
Mhm.
do you say you find your voice in writing?
I think the best way is like, say you want to write a story, right? And you have like all your quotes or whatever. It's like, okay, how do I want to tell this story? And that's basically you plan it out. Like, all right, you want to start here, go there, kind of stuff like that. Like you have to think about the way you want to write something. It's not just like you should start going like really quick and writing words down. Like if I'm writing like a long form story, it takes a while. I'm gonna change things probably 5,000 times, before it's finalized. And maybe that's just being a little bit over dramatic, maybe like, thinking too much about it. But sometimes you read something and you're like, actually, I don't like that. Let's move it back. And then you're like, wait a second, I like it the other way beforehand. So you're going back and forth. And yeah, no one's obviously perfect. There's no right way of doing it. But a way that's, you're satisfied with and you think tells the story properly. That's kind of like the way you want to say it in your voice.
I guess that makes a lot of sense there. I'm gonna try to take that with me when I go back to
Yeah.
school in the fall. But
Hmm.
you also mentioned calling games with the student radio there. So presents us, what are some opportunities that student radio provides?
Yeah, that's great. First of all, I never thought that I'd be able to travel for the student radio calls that I've done, which is pretty awesome. We cover every home and away men's and women's basketball games, same for football. For other sports like soccer, lacrosse, baseball, we do postseason only if we have to travel. But the fact that, going the road to these other places that you never thought you'd see before in your life is pretty insane. Like really random. I went to Nebraska last year for Rutgers basketball versus Nebraska, and I was like, wow, this Nebraska's pretty empty. But yeah, so it's like I was like, wow. But it's really, really awesome. I mean, to have basically, you're a student broadcaster, right? You're sitting there in the booth calling the game, and right next to you, there could be a professional broadcaster doing it. Maybe not professional, but it's just someone that's obviously this is their career, and maybe that's what you want to do. And that person, you're inspired by them, maybe and they're right next to you, calling the game, doing something you're doing. So it's pretty awesome. It's like, it's obviously great networking opportunities. You could talk to them after the game, before the game, kind of introduce yourself and tell them your backstory if you want. I always say do that, always network if you can. Um, but yeah, basically, it's a great, platform for your work, just as a student. And obviously, that's far from the best outcome if you want to do this full time. This is the beginning of your career, but it's still a good way to get your foot in the door and just kind of get started and get practice.
Yeah, the network thing is huge. I know before a lot of games, especially men's and women's basketball games, if I'm calling it on student radio, we'll try
Hmm.
to go down to the floor and talk to whoever is calling the game for the network. Or one of the coolest games I called was on Big Ten Plus. And it was cool because I was calling it with a guy named Jess
Hmm.
Settles, who typically does color on the Big Ten Network and like Fox Sports. And he's a former Iowa basketball player, so it's kind of cool to like work with a professional
Oh
and
yeah.
balance that out right there.
Yeah, it's like you're like, wow, like that person I know is like right there, right in front of me. You can talk to them. Pretty much pretty awesome.
No, it was a lot of fun, especially because like my grandfather went to the University of Iowa, and I was texting him like, "Guess who I'm calling this game with?" And he was stoked out, just probably as much as I was for
Hmm.
it.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but you mentioned going out to Nebraska, but what are maybe your favorite travel experiences? Maybe that was your favorite, but what's your favorite travel experience?
Hmm. That's a good one. So I'm gonna have to say when I went to St. Louis with my really good friend Johnny, he graduated, but we basically covered soccer together, men's and women's. We pretty much called like pretty much all the home games for Rutgers.
Mhm.
It was like we were the two guys. Like soccer's my big sport. Sure you can tell just from looking at my Twitter or anything. But yeah, so we Rutgers women's soccer was in St. Louis for the Big Ten tournament, and they beat Michigan State to move on to this part in the tournament, and it was like semifinal and final in St. Louis. So we get there. Obviously, they're playing USC, who I think was like number 4 in the country at the time in the semis, and it was a crazy game. Rutgers won in PKs. Bodmer, the goalie, made 3 straight saves. It was a thrilling game. We were like, wow, like we're going to the championship. The championship game was like 3 days later, though, or 2 days later. So we were like, oh, we got a full 3 days or whatever in St. Louis. What are we gonna do? Or I think it was 2 days. But I remember going to this like soccer restaurant, watching some games. We walked in the city a ton. So we had a really, really good time. We were there for like 5 days total. Um, and Rutgers played at St. Louis City Stadium, Energizer Park, which is like really, really nice. And like I said, I'm a big soccer guy, so seeing that brand new MLS stadium that was built like 2 years ago, I was like, wow. And like the broadcast booth was insane. It was super nice. So that was a great trip. Rutgers lost 5-0 in the championship, so that didn't go great. But there were still a lot of great moments from that trip, and it wasn't just, the games. We had a good time, me and Johnny, exploring the city, and it was just felt like it was like we were in our own world at that point. It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if you guys like what were you guys able to do with those extra days in St. Louis? Was it just the like sports bar it seemed like, or
I'm trying to remember exactly. Like I can't really think of
might
it
not
now.
be much?
But no, not really much. Like I think we just like we literally like probably went to the restaurant, ate, we walked in the city. Um, I'm kind of blanking right now, but like we didn't do much. But I remember it didn't feel like the days didn't feel long, so that's a good thing. It felt like it was quick. Like obviously after a while, you're like, all right, I've been here for 4 days now in this hotel room. I want to go back home. But
Yeah.
like the trip was still great overall, and looking back at it now, I kind of miss it. So
No, that's fair. I was like one part of it was like, all right, what are some cool things you can do there? Because you're in like a semi-major city, but St. Louis doesn't have like too much to do. I've been down there once, and there's like it's a nice city for a few days,
yeah.
but that's about it.
Yeah, pretty much. I say the same thing for Indianapolis because I went there. I went there for the Big Ten tournament this year for Rutgers, and I ended up getting stuck there for an extra 2 days because flight issues.
Mhm.
And I I just stayed and watched the rest of the Big Ten tournament games because I had my credential.
Mhm.
But like, I wanted to go around the city, but I was like, the city's just kind of boring. Maybe that's a crazy. Maybe that's a crazy take, but like, I was just like, I had enough of the city. Like after like 3 days being there.
I feel like it's either one you're visiting for like a weekend, or like if you live there, it's fine maybe because like it's not like overcrowded.
Yeah,
That's my assumption. I live like an hour and like I'm back home in Cincinnati. I live like an hour and a half from Indianapolis.
yeah.
When I drive to Iowa City for school, I go through Indy. So like I think it's fine, but I also haven't been out there enough to really give a clear answer probably. I might have butchered the whole city, but
Me too.
no, but I mean I was gonna like, with the whole soccer being your sport thing, obviously that makes sense from Twitter, but also Hudson River Blue, you said you write for them, correct?
Yes, sir.
So tell me what that looks like, what Hudson River Blue is, and the whole details there.
Yeah, so basically, Hudson River Blue was an SB Nation site. They were run by that. NYCFC was formed in 2013, this MLS club. Not super old, but I became a fan of them because I started liking soccer in 2014 because of the FIFA World Cup, actually. That was the backstory right there. And then that new team came to MLS and they signed some guys like Pirlo, Lampard, David Villa, who were like, European legends. And I was like, okay, this is gonna be my team I'm gonna support in MLS, not the Red Bulls. But so that kind of made my love for that team. And then I remember last summer, I was kind of, no, 2 summers ago, sorry. I was basically like, you know what, like, all these summers I'm just sitting here doing nothing. Let me reach out to Hudson River Blue and see if I can write for them because I always saw their work on Twitter. I saw their articles always. And I was like, like, why can I do this? So I reached out to them. I sent some samples over. They were impressed with it, and I've been with them now. And basically, as time's gone on, I've kind of grown into do more for the site. First I was just doing preview articles, talking to journalists from other teams, and kind of like writing preview articles based on the opponents. You ask them some questions, they answer the questions about the team. And then started going to games to actually get credentials, which was pretty awesome. I didn't think it was gonna happen. They were like, "Yeah, you want to go to this game?" I'm like, "Wait a second, really? Like, this is my team too." So it's pretty cool, like going to your favorite team's games, talking to the coach and the players after. And I wrote some articles for them, based on the game. And I still do the opponent stuff. That's actually kind of like my beat for the site. I always talk to the journalists from the other team, and I'm responsible for asking questions for the opponent and writing a preview article. That's kind of like my set beat for them. Um, and yeah, like I said, tri-state soccer team. So this summer, the Club World Cup was in the United States. A lot of games at MetLife, which is right in my backyard. And I was able to cover those games for Hudson River Blue at MetLife, which is pretty awesome because, the final was there, the semifinal was there. So it was really cool. And I'm a huge soccer fan. So seeing this tournament have some big European clubs and seeing journalists from all over the world was really, really insane. This was a crazy experience for me. Like I didn't think it was gonna happen. It was surreal.
No, that sounds super cool to be able to cover all that stuff. I gotta ask, maybe for them specifically, what's your favorite story you've written for them?
All right, so I'm gonna say the NYCFC goalie Matt Freeze
Hmm.
is really good, obviously. He when he came to the team, he was the backup, right?
Hmm.
And he wasn't really like seen as a great goalkeeper. And I remember writing a story basically saying like this guy should start for the team, and here's why. And since then, he's become a starting goalie. He's been insane. He actually, I was called up for the U.S. national team this summer at the Gold Cup and saved 3 penalties against Costa Rica. Um, so he was kind of like at that moment he kind of became a national hero because the whole world it was like in awe of this guy. He would say lost the final to Mexico in the Gold Cup final, but he had a great tournament, he played every game. So now he's obviously on this national stage, and people are saying maybe he could start, he'd be the starting goalie next year at the World Cup. So I remember writing that story like 2 years ago. This guy should be the NYC starting goalkeeper, and look where he is now. He's in talks to be the USA starting goalkeeper. So I feel like, I remember seeing like talking about that and I'm like, look where he is now. Like this guy's, he's made it.
No, that sounds like a really good thing to share. I feel like I have to share this story while I have the chance to, because I mean, if you can tell over here with my whole baseball thing, baseball is kind of my sport, but the marriage
Uh,
between them, um, I went out to Yankee Stadium once growing up, and I didn't go for a baseball game though. They had an NYCFC game there, and
oh,
that's
there you
how the
go.
marriage between the two. And I try to follow up with soccer as much as possible because I mean, we have FC Cincinnati right here in my hometown now. I know they're
Mhm.
doing pretty good, but maybe for some people, maybe including myself, that aren't keeping up with soccer as much. Give me your outlook on NYCFC this year, how they're looking right now, and maybe some future projections.
Yeah, good question. They're very hot and cold, I'd say. They're really good against some of the good teams in the Eastern Conference. I'm trying to think. Oh yeah, they have a Miami who have Messi. They beat some good teams. They beat Cincinnati at Citi Field. I was at that game. They beat Philly. I was at that game. So, they beat some good teams. And they've lost some bad games. Montreal, last place in the Eastern Conference, they lost them twice this season, home and away. That's really, really poor. You can't be doing that. Um, and they're really, really bad on the road. They're really, really tough on the road. Most of their games on the road are just, dull performances, either ties or bad losses. So it's weird because the team's great at home. They beat good teams at home. They look like a different team, but on the road, they're very, very different. There's the talent's there, but it's just got to figure out, that mindset, get over that road hump, and win some games on the road.
Yeah, no, that's hopefully it can happen. That's the thing with a lot of teams I see in general, across sports, not just with soccer and everything, just like getting over the hump away from their home stadium. Sometimes the
Yeah.
travel beats up on some teams.
Yeah, I remember you also asked future projection. Sorry. What was I gonna say? Yeah, this team actually has some hope for the future. I think they got a lot of good young players in this team, and players that are still developing. When this is our first year under Pascal Janssen, the new head coach, and he's brought in some good guys. More signings are coming, apparently coming this summer. We'll see if that happens. But I think that the team, take some time to develop under Pascal Janssen, and in 2 years they're getting their own stadium right next to City Field, actually called Etihad Park, which is pretty sick. First soccer stadium in New York, which is pretty awesome. I can't wait to be there. But yeah, I think they'll still make the playoffs this year. I think probably like a 6, 7 spot in the Eastern Conference, and then yeah, we'll see what goes from there. But I think this team still has the talent every year to make the playoffs. Just make a decent run. It's just about getting results in the season that are important.
And I didn't realize they were getting a stadium now. That you said about 2 years for that.
Yeah, 2027.
Damn, that's really cool to hear there. I'm
Yeah.
glad I got to find that out before it just popped up on my feed. But with doing all this stuff, I guess with the Daily Targum, your student radio, and then now Hudson River Blue, what do you think is the hardest thing being a student journalist with all of these things combined?
I can't. I don't even know. The hardest thing that could be tough. I mean, I think it could be just sometimes balancing classes. That was pretty hard for me last semester. Or last year, I should say. It was times where I was just like, I got this assignment. I'm like, oh man, like pushing off to the last minute, and it's like you're like, let's say like you have your classes, and then you're done for the day, and the last thing you want to do is do schoolwork. Like
Hmm.
you just don't want to do like after classes, I'm going to the Targum office and editing articles, and then I go home, and then I'm like done for the day, and then the next day go to class, do that, and then the weekend comes, and you're like, I have to cover this game, and then you're like Sunday, and you're like, as an assignment due Sunday, and you're like, oh, the whole week just went by because you were like busy with stuff, and it's just like the last thing you want to do is write some discussion response. Like you don't want to do that. Like you don't want to be doing that. So it's like that's the hardest thing for me sometimes. It's just like this is class time, this is schoolwork time, this is, time free time and stuff like that. Like just finding time to do my schoolwork.
I can give you like a high five through the screen here for that. I felt that a lot, especially the last semester of this past year. But you started to get into it a little bit there. How did you best find a way to balance everything?
Yeah, I'm a commuter, so it's not like I think I'm able to at times to go home and be like, all right, this is the time I'm gonna focus on my classwork. I'd say I usually use the weekends like to do schoolwork probably, or just nighttime.
Mhm.
But yeah, I basically figured out a schedule where like, all right, this is when I'm gonna do my schoolwork, and it depends each semester with the classes, my times and everything. But usually I have time. I'm able to like try to lock in and do as much work as I can and kind of grind it all out. So I know like, all right, this week coming up, I'm calling 2 games and I'm covering these games. I gotta get this work done in advance. So just kind of doing like that and working ahead always, thinking ahead like these assignments are these dates. These days I'm gonna be busy, so let's do this. Let's do all this stuff on this day. Kind of stuff like that. Just plan ahead.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think is probably the best way to do all of that is just make sure
Hmm.
you're ahead of stuff. Because then, as you said, it's like 11 o'clock midnight and you've got to get five more assignments done before the next day. So I
Yeah.
completely get you there. But I mean, obviously, we've talked about a few different things that you've worked through. And I mean, on one side, you do some broadcasting work, you're on the air, but the other side is writing as well. And while some people might not see those meshing as well, I think you'll know that it's not just black and white. You kind of can take things from each and bring it over to your other job. So, how do you see the meshing between those two jobs?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously they're very similar. They're both covering a team in some way. One's obviously written, one's obviously spoken, you could say. Do you mean like kind of like how like they're similar? What do you kind of mean by the
Yeah,
question?
so like how do you take things from like let's just say one job and learn it and apply it to your other job?
Yeah, I think both jobs obviously involve certain skills, whether it's sometimes multitasking, you could say, or just kind of also thinking ahead. You got to plan out. I guess you could say that. Like I said for writing, you got to plan out how you want to write stuff, plan out your thoughts ahead of time. And for broadcasting, you got to plan out, maybe how you want to discuss something or talk about something, whether it's, pregame you're talking about this player's injury or something like that, or you're talking about the player's, current form they're in. So I think there's things that are similar in both jobs, and I think, at times broadcasters will take stuff from, written articles to use stuff for their stories. Maybe sometimes writers will take something from a broadcast that was mentioned in their articles. So it's kind of like they're both obviously doing the same thing. They're covering a team, talking about the game. One's obviously different than the other in a certain way, whether it's writing or, spoken. But yeah, there are a lot of similarities, like you said. I think it's kind of like. At times, sometimes I'm writing my article and I'm like, no, I wrote that in a way I'd broadcast it. Let me delete that. It doesn't sound right. I think that's kind of a similar. Sometimes it kind of overlaps for me. I'm like, wait a second, that doesn't read right the way I would if I said it on the air. So it's kind of like I have to delete it and think again. But yeah, I know what you mean. There's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess with like the overlap there at the end of writing in a certain way, like how do you separate your written voice from your spoken voice? Like how do you make it still seem natural, but it has its own style?
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think I've actually fully figured out like, for my like broadcast voice. Yeah, I actually don't think I have. I think my written voice I've figured it out. So I think I've done a lot more writing. But broadcasting obviously is just kind of more of a thing I do for fun. That's not really my goal to become a broadcaster. It's just something I do for fun. But at times I'm still thinking like, was it the right way I should have said that? Was that the right way I should have called that? Was that the right tone I had there? I don't know if I fully figured that out yet. But I think for obviously for both and be yourself, but I think for broadcasting it's really more important. It's just really, you know, don't overthink stuff. Just kind of say it. I mean, like you're explaining what's happening in the game, just say it directly. You don't have to overthink it. I think that's kind of if you overthink it, you're gonna wonder like, should I say it like this? Should I say it like that? Just, say what's happening. That's pretty much it. So it's tough to it sounds easy, but it can be a little tough at times to be like, all right, like how do you want to say this? Because people are always going to overthink it, especially when you're, striving to be as best as you can.
Yeah, and then when you overthink, like in my case, at least I'll stumble on my words and I'll fall apart and I'll like lose
Yeah,
the fall right there.
yeah,
That's definitely where I see myself kind of like growing over the past year. But being the sports editor, this is probably something I should have asked a little while ago. But being sports editor with Daily Targum, you mentioned how you're scheduling out, all right, stories to run on Monday and this story should go on Tuesday. Is there a certain way you look at the like stories that have been pitched to you and think, all right, I want this on a specific day compared to a different story?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'd say certain days like Monday and Tuesday are days we kind of go for like maybe the more low-key stories. And not every story is Rutgers related. So we have like people write about UFC sometimes, or just like columns based on MLB and NFL. Those stories will go usually go on like a Monday or Tuesday, because those days are usually more chill days. And then like, I remember I'm thinking Thursdays are mostly like our heavy day where we have like a lot of previews for the weekend games because we don't publish on Fridays. Well, sports does unless it's recaps. It's a little bit complicated here, but sports kind of has its own schedule. But like Thursdays, we usually run all like our previews for the weekend, whether it's like a football game on a Saturday, basketball game on a Saturday, or they don't really play Saturday, but stuff like that. So usually I'm kind of planning out like, maybe the smaller stories would be early in the week, and then the bigger stories like previews and just like, whether it's focused on like anything, it will Rutgers will go more towards the end of the week. So that's kind of it can be tough at times because some weeks you're sitting there and you're like, wow, I have like no stories in mind, and you're like, what am I gonna do on a Monday? There's one article, and what am I gonna do? And there's times I have to step in and write something myself, just come up with something, and it could be at times you're in class and you're like thinking to your head, like I'm losing in my head, like what are we gonna do this week for the stories? And it's like I'm not paying attention to the lecture at all. Like I'm not even looking at it. But yeah, there's times where I'm just like, anyone have any ideas? And like I hear I hear crickets, and I'm just like, oh, like I guess I gotta figure something out this time. But I'm not complaining. I still love the role and everything, and it's fun to edit people's articles. I like to help people learn. Like I said, I'm not perfect, but I know there's things that people can improve on, and I can spot it, and I'm like, all right, here's what you can do because I was in that spot, earlier in my life.
Yeah, no, I that part about being in class and the lecture speaks to my heart. That is what I do a lot of time. I'll figure out which classes work best for me to get other work done sometimes.
Oh
So
yeah.
if there's any professors listening, don't listen to us right now.
Yeah, no.
Um, but you mentioned the learning aspect of it. And I mean, obviously, as student journalists, we are still learning a lot of things, but I think we also get a lot of really cool stories that come through our respective like media outlets. So, what are some of the cooler Rutgers or just other stories that have gone through the Daily Targum, maybe that you've written or just have seen?
I'm gonna be a little selfish with two of my stories here. Just,
Yeah,
sorry
absolutely.
guys. Sorry everybody. I let's see. It's gonna get a little crazy here, but Alexi Lawless, obviously a very controversial former soccer player, for his views on the president and everything. I'm not gonna get into all that, but people don't like him for reasons of that nature. But he's from Rutgers. He's now a analyst for Fox Sports for soccer, so he's very well known, obviously, always on national TV. And I talked to him, in the winter just online about his career at Rutgers and everything, and wrote a story on it. It was pretty awesome to talk to him, though. It was really cool. He's obviously really, really well known. So I was a little bit nervous. Didn't think he was gonna answer me. I just shot him a Twitter DM, and he's like, "Yeah, let's do it." He answered like 5 minutes later, and I'm like, "Oh, okay." That was pretty cool. I'm actually right now writing a story on Carly Lloyd. She's also from Rutgers, and I talked to her like last month or 2 months ago, and I haven't gotten around to writing a story, but I'm doing it right now. Procrastinated there. But I'm writing a story based on her career at Rutgers and everything, and how she went on to win two World Cups and everything. So it's a really cool story. That's a story where I'm like, that's another story I'm struggling to figure out at times like how I want to plan it, write this out because everyone knows what she did with her USA career. I'm trying to focus more on her, rise up from high school to there because, it features Rutgers, which is obviously huge. That was a big role in her career. Um, so it was cool to talk to her too. I think she's by far the most successful Rutgers athlete of all time. I mean, two World Cups, two Olympic gold medals, 316 appearances with the U.S. national team. She's an icon. And what was I gonna say? Oh yeah, I wrote a pretty cool story about Dylan Harper and Ace Bailey after Rutgers didn't make the NCAA tournament last year. It's basically just like a what went wrong article. I didn't hate on them. They were great, obviously, but it was a pretty cool story to write. I knew in my head like this story is gonna. I had the story actually mostly pre-written before they lost in the Big Ten tournament, and then I just added on the final touches and published it the next few days later. But those are some stories I'm really proud of.
And talk to me about what it was like to watch those two, especially with the season that Rutgers men's basketball had.
Yeah, so my good friend Camden was covering men's basketball last year because he was a senior. So this year I'm covering men's basketball, so it should be a tough year for us, but that won't be really be fun. But hopefully it will be. But I saw more of it actually broadcasting last year than being there for the Daily Targum. I was there for a few games, but I was mostly there broadcasting, and it was awesome to obviously call those games. I mean, those guys were insane. They could just, do something in a matter of seconds, and they could change the game crazy. But yeah, all year long there was all talk about, this is the team, and I remember I was so excited when the season finally started, and we saw, the team looked good at the start. It was non-conference play, some weak teams, and then the whole started to finally show when they started to lose some games, and yeah, obviously it did not go good at all. So it went from, what's the word, like just pure excitement to pure disappointment, like pretty quick, like in the matter of like 2 months from the season starting. It was really pretty rough to cover that team or just be around it at times last season.
No, I gotta assume that felt like almost like a dagger in the heart a little bit.
Yeah, 100%. Everyone was like, this is gonna be a year to remember forever, and it will be the year to remember, but not for the reasons that people want it to be.
It should have. I mean, it should have been though. It really should have
Oh
been.
yeah, I know. Yeah, don't get me started.
They not to
I could be here all day.
Yeah, not to bring it back up and put that back on you guys again at all. I know that was probably not a great feeling, but still cool to see those two play as you
Yeah,
were
that was
mentioning
awesome.
still. But I think again, writing isn't really my forte as much, not what I do as much. I do like or I do more of the TV side of things, but talking to a lot of people, whether it's at Iowa or through even this podcast, they'll either say when they're going to try to find their like how they want to tell a story sometimes they're like, I just like to do it on the spot. Whatever comes to me is my best like look. When I go back and second guess myself, they don't feel as comfortable. Or other people have told me they like, all right, I'm gonna do it one day, then I'll go the next day and I'll look at it and see if it's still the way I want to tell the story. Then I'll look at it the day after that and see if that's still how I want to tell the story. And if I'm comfortable, then I'll submit it for publication. What is your kind of style there? Are you the same way as that, or is there a different way you try to find the way you tell your stories?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think for stories that are time sensitive, like a recap, I'm kind of that person that just kind of writes it, and that's it. Maybe I'll go back and edit it in the system after it's done the next day when I read it in the morning, but not too much. I think when I'm writing under time pressure, I'm kind of able to lock in more and kind of write it better that the way I would like it more. But when you're not on a budget crunch like that for time, obviously, you're writing a story that you can publish whenever you want, like my Carly Lloyd story right now. I'm able to go back and look at it a lot of times. Maybe that's not really a good thing because, you can keep changing it and you're like, that's not good, that's not good. But I've done it before where I go back in the next day and read it over. That happens a lot with me. But, those recap stories, I like that. I agree with that. The kind of you write it, you just kind of, start going and writing and then you're done, you're done. That's kind of at times I think you can also let your voice flow through more because you're not even thinking, you're just writing about what's happening right in front of you. So it's kind of like second nature because, you're not thinking, should I use this word here? Should I start a new paragraph here? Should I remove the sentence? Should I mention the fact that they did this? You're just going and whatever feels right. And then, like I said, you can go back and change it the next day, but I try to avoid changing it drastically because I just, that's just a story. I want to keep it how I wrote it.
Yeah, I think that's a side that some people don't see, especially with student journalism. So I'm glad you're able to talk on that for a little bit. But you also mentioned earlier, sometimes, and I feel this a lot, is I get a little nervous getting ready to talk to some people or do an interview. Um, so my question for you would be, how do you kind of push through or grow out of those nerves the more you do it?
Because I'd say if you don't, let's say you're nervous to ask a question to a player, right? Later that night, you're gonna be like, oh, I should have asked him. Even if I stuttered, who cares? I should have asked him the question. So there's times where I'm in front of this person and I'm like, oh, like I want to talk to them and like I'm nervous, but I'm like, will this chance ever come again in my life? Well, let's just do it. What's like I promise you, if you stutter a little bit, like no one's gonna care that much. Like no one's gonna remember that. They're all focused on talking to him. They're not worried about what you're saying, how you look, what you're doing. So one, because you're gonna if you do it, you'll make yourself happy, and two, you won't regret it later on. So just always I always think like that. Like like just make the most of your chances. I know it might seem tough and you might be scared to do it, but you gotta just do it because you want to do it. That's the thing. You want to do it. You're just trying to get over your nerves. So just do it, basically.
That's exactly what it is. That's something I try to get a lot better with this past year. Like all right, just do it because you'll feel better. Exactly as you were saying, you'll feel better about it. And then you'll have the question you want for your story. I mean, that was
Yeah.
some of my stuff. It was like, all right, I need someone to speak on this. Please give me one question. But
Yeah. Yeah, you're like, come on. Just come on, man.
he's passing it around. Like we were hosting we had a WNBA preseason game at Iowa with the Fever and the Brazil national team.
Wow.
And at the very like after the game, I was like, I gotta get this one question from Caitlin Clark. So I was lucky that I got like the last question of the post game press conference, and was I again nervous as all could be to ask this question. But luckily, I cleared my throat right before and just went for it and got an answer that I ended up using in my story. So, I mean, it's stuff like that. I've
Yeah.
stumbled millions of times. I've been like, when you talk about going to the Big Ten tournament, was it men's basketball or women's basketball that you were in Indy for this
Oh,
past
that
year?
was men's. That
You're
was
men.
hard too. That was tough. 'Cause
I was there
we went in the locker room after, and that was oof. That might have been the toughest moment of my career, like just like talking to players after that.
because I was there for the men's as well, like for Iowa. And I mean, same, because you guys, correct me if I'm wrong. First round was USC.
Yeah, they lost in double overtime.
Yeah, because Iowa played right before that, and they had beat Ohio State for the first, like they had played Ohio State in the first round of that tournament for 3 consecutive years, and they hadn't
Oh,
beat Ohio State yet. So, like I did my story, and I went back out and watched the double overtime, and yeah, that was a great game, but obviously a really crushing result.
yeah. I mean, I remember. I think it was if Rutgers won, they would have probably played Purdue. I think it was something like that. And I was like, yeah. Well, me and a friend were like, they're losing after this. So like, like let's just see one win. So it's just like somewhat decent. And then they lose to Purdue, whatever, and they call it a day. But the fact that they lost at USC, and I know the players also were thinking we can win this game. I mean, they beat them at Jersey Mike's Arena earlier in the season. And I actually called that game. That was a great game. But I was like, they beat this team once. They could do it again. And for a while they were leading, and I don't really remember exactly how it went, but I think they were leading, and then they let USC get back into the game in the second half, and then the whole thing happened. And like you were right, that was a crazy game. It was really fun to watch. It just sucked that Rutgers was on the losing side of it.
Yeah, I know. I mean, like with Iowa, it was the following night they lost. Is we were not expecting Iowa to go very far in that tournament either. But it was a really weird result where like it was a shootout of score. I don't remember what the score was, but it was Illinois scored in the hundreds, and I think Iowa was in the 80s. Um,
Mm.
so like they got killed obviously, but it was a high scoring affair, and they lost like their career player who returned from the NBA draft the previous year and then wasn't drafted this year. That's Peyton Sanford. Um, but it was really, yeah, like stepping in that locker room. I remember telling people like the same thing. It was tough watching some of these guys like kind of break down, hug it out. I don't know if your guys' situation was the same, but when I walked in, we walked in with a few other reporters, and we all kind of like stopped for a minute before starting to ask some questions because they were all hugging each other and kind of saying like great season to each other. So we gave them a few extra minutes
Hmm.
to get that over and get through some of that.
Yeah, I was actually like a few minutes late to the locker room, so I missed a chance to talk to Harper and Bailey, but someone sent me the audio for them, which is pretty nice. So I was able to use those quotes. But I talked to the other guys because I remember walking in and he's like, "Oh, the SAD's like, oh, sorry, Harper and Bailey already done talking," and I was like, I saw them in the corner with like their heads in the towels. I'm just like, ugh, this is an awkward sight. Like, this is really, really awkward. And like, you could just like the room was just completely quiet. Like, first of all, the SAD was whispering to us. So that's also another thing. He was whispering. All the
Yeah.
players were just staring down. Like, no one was like talking or like looking at each other. They all just like head in the ground, head in the towels. And I went to the players and asked them questions. I mean, like, their quotes, they didn't really want to say much. Their quotes weren't great. I wasn't expecting that. But it was just a moment where I was like, wow, like, it just felt so awkward. And these are guys I talked to before in the past, and after wins, and they were like super great, gave great answers. And, it looked like they didn't want to see me at all. And I'm not surprised, they didn't want to talk to me. That's the last thing they want to do. But yeah, it was a tough moment. And I still haven't experienced the moment as awkward as that yet. I don't really want to, but I'm sure I will eventually. It's that's hard. That's something that you're not prepared for. It's tough.
No, it was that's what I've told people exactly. Is I don't think you can really prepare for being in that moment until you're in it because it felt so awkward. I was like, who even wants to ask the first question? Because yeah, we're there to do like a job, and obviously both sides respect that. But I also know the human side of that of like, yeah, this is the end of some of your careers, or this is the end of a tough season, And like at that
Yeah.
point too with Iowa, they knew they're probably losing their head coach as well, which they did. Um, yeah, so like being in that moment, I didn't even know how to like get through and kind of break the silence of asking a first question.
Yeah, I think I just went up to a player and asked him a question. Like, I just kind of was like, "Screw it, let's do it." And obviously, I wasn't pleased with like listening back to the audio. Like, my voice, you can hear I'm very like quiet and like I even sound a little bit like low to and like a little bit out of place. Like I didn't sound like myself because I was just really really weird. And for Rutgers, I think it's even worse because that season they knew it was a failure. The players knew it was a failure. All of them did. Harper and Bailey were like, "This is not the way we thought it was gonna go." A lot of the players were like man, like this season just sucked. So I know that also added to the feeling. And yeah, you're right. I mean, some of those guys, that was the end of their careers, so it's a very emotional moment for them. They've been playing basketball maybe their whole life, and now they're done just like that. It's tough. I remember after women's soccer lost to UConn actually at a Yursak Field, our home stadium. I went down to the coach, the pitch to talk to the coach. I saw two of the players like just bawling their eyes out because that was in their soccer careers too. But one of them went on to play in the NWSL. But at that moment it was, and it was just like I was like I don't even want to look. Like I feel like bad like just like looking at them or anything. So it's like it's tough. It's just really emotional seeing someone else go through that when you're just kind of right there is like makes you feel a little bit like weird.
Yeah, no, it really does. I was thinking about the indie tournament again because we were talking about, no one's gonna remember if you mess up a question or anything. No one remembers that I messed this up, but I remember, and I'm going to share that it was after Iowa beat Ohio State. You know the room where they had the press conferences in?
Yeah, that big room and still left all like the tables and the food and everything.
Oh yeah, well the food was nice. Let me tell you, I was a constant snacker all day because I mean the motto is if it's free, it's for me, right?
I was always eating those M&M cookies.
Oh, they were so good.
I know.
They were so
We were like, we go back like, did they restock them? I hope they did. And they did. I was like, yes.
yes. I would take like two at a time and just bring
Yeah.
it back to the table while I was working.
Yeah. See, exactly. They were so good.
It's the way they do it. And then I would like, because they had like the sodas and the waters, and I'd get a water now and then, but I was being a little weird with getting a bunch of sodas because it was free. And I'm like, I don't have to pay for water in most places. I had to pay for a soda. So I got to get
Of
the soda
course.
while I can. I sound like a college kid, don't I? But
And we're still college kids at the end of the day.
exactly. I mean, that's what matters. We're still typical college kids. We just get to do a really cool job, right? But it was like after Iowa beat Ohio State, we're in the room and traveling. It was me and one of our like newspaper guys who's now one of the co-sports editors at Daily Iowan.
Hmm.
And we're sitting in this room, and the winning team would go up first. So it's Fran McCaffrey, our head coach, and two of the players step up. And as they start stepping up and walking to the room, I look at the other guy with me. His name is Matthew McGowan. And I was like, where's everyone else? We were about the only two reporters in this room to ask questions. And there was like one or two other guys that trickled into the very back, but they weren't like covering Iowa or Ohio State. They were just general like indie reporters. Um, so like they're like, all right, questions for the players first. So Matthew asked a question, and I asked a question. They're like, anyone else? No one else was there to ask questions, and we didn't really have too much more. So they dismissed the players and like, all right, questions for Fran McCaffrey. Um, and at this time, I got sick the day before. Not like sick as in like, oh, I had the flu or anything, but like I lost my voice type of sick.
Hmm.
So I'm trying to keep up and ask all these questions. And it was just me and him going back and forth. We each probably asked like four or five questions to Fran McCaffrey to keep him there. And the very last one, I'm getting ready to ask the question about Illinois because he's like Matthew asked the question that I was going to ask. So I'm like, all right, I got to think of something different. They already handed me the microphone. So I'm asking this question. And again, I've lost my voice and I'm asking about question 4 or 5 at this point. And I'm looking up, and Fran McCaffrey, if you don't know, very stern, doesn't like answering some questions,
Hmm.
stares me down, and I start going, so when you look at this game some more, like I couldn't get it out. I completely lost it and could not say anything. So I'm like repeating myself and trying to stumble over and get to the point of this question of like, about Illinois basketball, whatever it may have been. It ended up working out just fine, but it was like I really didn't think I was gonna get the question out for a minute because it was stuck in my throat.
That's funny. That's funny. Wait, why are you the only two people there? No one else traveled for Iowa?
No, they had a lot of people travel. They just didn't come down to the press conference room. I think we were all trying to figure out at that point too, like how the system was working with like the locker rooms and everything.
That's why I was late, like 2 minutes. I didn't even realize that it was happening simultaneously. So I just like ran down there.
I didn't either. So like I like for the game one, I did not go down to the locker rooms. I didn't really need some of that stuff after they beat Ohio State because I got enough decent quotes from the press conference. But like I also knew someone else that was going down there, and they're like, it's not too many great quotes right now. You're all good. Um,
Mm.
but no one came up from the locker room. Everyone went down there, and they didn't come up for the press conference. So it was just us two there, and then a few other guys who like trickled in the middle of it, and it was really weird because then all the other Iowa reporters came up. They're like, "Oh, they already did it." I'm like, "Yeah." So
Hmm.
like from being there, they gave everyone a transcript of it, so everyone still got to use the quotes from everything that we asked. But it was like
Yeah.
no one else was there that kind of helps to help help out things.
Yeah, my friend and I were like, I was like, what's like, how's it work? I'm like, let me go down there and just look. So my friend stayed at the press conference for Rutgers, and I came back. But the funny thing is, I made it to the locker room, right? I like some security guy showed me the way, and like I said, I was a few minutes late, so I missed like quotes from Harbor and Bailey, but whatever. Someone I knew sent them to me, so it still was worked out. And then I was talking to the players, and the SID's like, "All right, guys, we're going to the press conference now." I'm like, oh, like so I was actually walking behind Steve Peichel and like the SID to the press conference. So when they walk in the like, so I guess while I was in the locker room, USC was going first, so I wasn't missing much. Like my friend was there, but it's so funny because like my friend, I'm texting him like, all right, we're walking up now, and the door opens up. Steve Peichel walks in. So there's like I think two players, Jeremiah Williams and Tyson Acuff. And then right behind them is me, like just walking in behind them. Because I was still in the locker room talking to the players, and then the SIDs right there too. But it's just so funny because like, my friend's like, you're just walking right behind them. Like, you look so like stupid. Like, not stupid, but, like just out of place, so goofy. So it's just so funny because like, I'm like walking, I'm like texting him, I'm like behind Steve Pico and I walk into the press conference or whatever. And like, I just show up behind them. So like, it was just funny. It was a funny moment.
It was, but it also like wasn't too clear that that's what was happening. Like, they're doing it
No.
simultaneously, and it made it so hard because you can't be in two places at once.
Exactly. That's why I was like, let's just split up. And like I even asked one of the workers in the press conference room, like, is the lock is the I said is like the locker room interviews happening now or whatever open? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh, that's great. Like I don't even know what to do now. They're like they didn't even know anything. So I'm just like, all right, let's just go on there and see what's happening because it said like they'll open at this time or whatever. But it didn't say which one was going for. I don't know. It was just confusing. I remember reading the email like 1,000 times trying to figure it out.
Yeah, you know, because like we got, don't worry, we got the same thing, like the same answer to that question from people there of like, we're not really sure. Because like we looked at it and you remember like the way it was written was like it'll open 30, like 15 or 20 or 30 minutes after the game and they'll do press conferences first. And then we sit there and they're like, oh no, they're open at the same time. And I was like,
Yeah, so you think you can go to the press conference and go to the locker room after.
"Hmm,
That's what the thought was.
yep.
But it's like, no, you got to pick one or the other.
No, it was, yeah, it was a whole weird thing. I guess also with like Rutgers basketball, because Dylan Harper, Ace Bailey, I want to ask you about the season, but with their them getting drafted this summer, do you guys have any coverage with the NBA draft?
Yeah, I tried to get there for the Targum, but the NBA thing I never heard back, which kind of sucked. I was like, I remember in May I was like applying for stuff, and people I know from like Rutgers rivals and everything sent me links, and I just never heard back. So I was kind of like, okay, well, I tried my best.
Yeah,
That's all I can do. But I remember applying and everything, but it was I wanted to be there, but couldn't be. Um, but yeah, there were other Rutgers. There was other like Rutgers and local coverage there. Wish I was there, but oh well. What am I gonna do? I tried.
that's fair. I mean, I guess also like pre-draft, like, was there anything that you guys had like pre-draft leading up to things with? Because I know, like, I'll throw it out there. There was some stuff out there about Ace Bailey and his messages to some teams.
Oh
Did you
yeah.
guys have any coverage leading up while you were still in school?
I mean, after the Big Ten tournament, we talked to Ace Bailey. Well, I used quotes, not they weren't my quotes, but I used quotes about his NBA stuff, and he was kind of just saying stuff like, how he wasn't basically saying he was going to the NBA draft, but then he did. Um, it was I didn't really write a lot about his stuff with skipping the practice with the Sixers or whatever and skipping whatever this and saying this about the Jazz. We didn't really cover the Targum, but other outlets did. But yeah, it was like, if I went there, I would have covered more stuff about that and wrote about it. But since we weren't there, I wasn't really able to get stuff like that.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It also makes it hard while you're on campus too, and you're also covering all the other sports. There's a lot of, I feel like a lot of those guys in the professional sense are on the beat for like two, three sports in their different seasons typically. So it's a lot harder
Oh
as a
yeah.
student journalist because you're overseeing every sport on campus pretty much.
Yeah, I mean also like it goes back to like the classwork stuff. Like there's sometimes things will happen, like a thing will break and you're like, ah shoot, like I was in class, whatever, I missed it by like a second or two. Or like also this is another thing I want to kind of mention that, it goes back to student journalists, but like there's times where student journalists kind of like get pushed under the rug. Like it's happened a lot. Like sometimes there's like other Rutgers media outlets like they'll get scooped on things and I'll like see and I'm like, why didn't we know about that? Or like why didn't we know about it? Or like also just like all these outlets got to talk to Steve Peichel in his office about this and I'm like, well, why wasn't the Targum involved? We're at every single home game, we've been covering it for years through the bad, like the bad years ago and like, the high, which was I guess you could say last season because there was a lot of hype, but like why was the Targum not informed about this? Why didn't we know about this? It can be a little frustrating. That's why at times when I'm like, thanks guys. Like,
No, it is very frustrating because also the Targum has a good stand, like good historical standing there at Rutgers, correct?
yeah, I think it's the second oldest newspaper in the country, college newspaper, something like that.
Wow, that is extremely impressive. I knew it had some history there, but I didn't realize it was maybe the second oldest in the country. But it flows
Don't
into,
quote me. I'm pretty sure that's right.
we'll say it's one of the oldest in the country.
Yeah,
How about
yeah.
that? That's the quote there because it's around that spot.
Yeah, it's like
Okay,
from like the 1800s, 1869, 1868, something like that.
I should know when the Daily Iowan because like on TV sides, DITV, it's Daily Iowan TV were the same thing. So I should know when the Daily Iowan started. I don't off the top of my head, but I know it's pretty old as well. I don't know if it's that old, but with the whole student journalism thing, sometimes it gets overlooked sometimes, and that's a big thing of why we have this podcast right now is to share, at least maybe even in your words, why student journalism shouldn't be overlooked, why people should pay attention to student journalism and their stories and what's happening.
Yeah, I just looked also. It's the second oldest, so that's good. So I was right
It's
there.
like, good job.
Yeah, yeah. But I think one thing to remember with this is that a lot of professionals come from student journalism. So maybe that guy that's writing for this website, he gets all the scoop. He's really well known, but like he started where I started. So it's like, at times I'm like kind of like think about it like that. Like, every this is the starting point for a lot of people. Like, yeah, maybe we're students, but some people are good enough to go on and have careers in this. So I think it's kind of people just think like, oh, like they're just kids, like, whatever. They're doing this for fun. They just want to like they want to make their college experience cool or something like that. People don't always think the same way, like, oh, like this is a student journalist that's like, really trying to make this their life eventually one day, and this is really important to them. Like this, going to this press conference, getting this question is really important to them more than maybe just a person that's there just to be like, yeah, I'm kind of bored and I want to call games for fun. So, it's kind of like I said, it goes back to that part where it's like, oh, they're just kids, they don't make money off this. They're not doing this. They're doing it maybe for their class or something. They're not doing it for this. So it's kind of like that. There's that mindset behind it, but they don't. Not everyone thinks the same way. Like, oh, student journalists can be good too. Like, some of them, maybe they're like a diamond in the rough. Like they're the next big, whatever. Like you never know.
No, it's a good point. There is a lot of people you find in journalism who pair up with some of those professionals, and I think another thing I'll ask is, I mean, in your terms, what are some of those aspects or things about student journalism that just makes it so unique and special compared to other forms of journalism?
Well, I think that um there could be a passion behind it. Like I think I have the passion where like I'm always gonna do like whatever I can to cover this story, to get this quote, to write this article. So yeah, I'm always gonna try my best. And also like I don't know if I want to say like it's unique, but like like it kind of is like it's not as traditional as like writers have been doing it for 40 years or 50 years, like more experienced people. Like I said, it could be worse too because they started their careers. But it's people that are hungry to learn. They're motivated. They want to write. They're curious. Maybe people get burnt out after time being journalists. They're like, oh, like I don't want to cover this anymore. Like I'm just kind of doing it just to get my bills paid or whatever. Like, but like me at least, like I want to do this. I want to cover this stuff. I want to do as much as I can. So, there's that passion behind it to find a good story, to write a good story, to tell a good story, all that. There's a lot of motivation behind it.
Absolutely there. I mean, that's what the same thing I feel there with the motivation. I love doing all this different stuff. And I think that's the nice thing that we can show through this podcast is every single person on here has a passion and they show it through all their work, which again, if you want to share, there's a chance here. The nice thing about journalism, especially as a student, is networking. It's really important. So a chance here for you to plug all of your work and give a shout out to the people to give a look at to after they listen to this.
Yeah, so you can just look up my name, Matthew Mangum, on like Twitter and everything. That's where most of my stuff is on Twitter, and you can just look it up. You'll find my Hudson River Blue work and Daily Targum work, and yeah, I guess next year for Rutgers I'll be covering. I'll do some football coverage with my other sports editor, and then I'll be doing basketball in the winter. Then I'll graduate from Rutgers, and then for Hudson River Blue, I'll just be covering NYCFC again the whole season. They're in season right now, so just I'll be covering them to the playoffs, and then however they do next year. So, and then from there, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens in my career, and maybe I'll be covering the World Cup next summer for Hudson River Blue. We'll see. That'll be pretty sick because the Club World Cup just happened. Now I have a chance to maybe cover a World Cup next summer. So hopefully that will happen after I graduate.
That'd be sick. Hopefully it happens because I know I will, and hopefully everyone else will continue to follow you. And I'll link everything in the description for this. But Matthew, again, thank you for joining me, and I really appreciate you giving me some of your time today.
Of course, had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Make sure to follow along with Matthew and check out his work as he begins to lead the sports section of the second oldest student paper in the country. And if you want to stay up to date with all upcoming episodes of the Student Beat, make sure to follow me on Twitter at C_Crithers33. We just walked the Student Beat. I'll see you next week for a brand new episode.